I can invite all the speakers this morning to come up and join us. So just as a reminder, that's Paul Leeuw, who we heard from first, Director of the Oil and Gas Institute at the RGU.
Any particular way, or?
Wherever you like. Oh, right. Sarah Forbes, Director of Projects and Innovation from Petersons, who we heard from second. Christian, who we just heard from Crimson & Co. And Stephen from the OGTC. And two new faces for you. So Jack Macfarlane down at the end. So Jack is from DeepStream. He's the CEO, who are a B2B Amazon-like online procurement platform working in the oil and gas space. And to Phil Greening, Associate Professor from the Centre for Sustainable Road Freight from Heriot University. Quick round of applause for the panellists, just to get them warmed up. Would we like to start with any questions from the floor? You've all been very patient whilst we've been talking at you for the last couple of hours. So anybody got any burning questions they want to fire at one of our experts up here? If you could just introduce yourself briefly and direct who you would like to answer your question as well.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you for everything up until now. My name is Tim Everett. I'm doing some work for the Oil and Gas Technology Centre on deploying IoT networks offshore, and I've spent my working life in offshore telecom and so on. In my experience, the oil and gas industry has a previous history of transforming using digital. This really occurred in the 1990s was started when BP and Statoil got really narked with Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker Hughes and Weatherford and these people, because they were using proprietary formats for subsea data. And so BP and Statoil, first of all, formed what was called WITS, Well Information Transport System, which then was passed over to POSC and Energistics. And that was the transformative event, the development into data standards for subsea. And that, combined with the fact that the oil operators started to use these standards, these data standards themselves, and then demand contractually that their suppliers use these standards, was in a sense the transformative event that led to a unlocking an enormous amount of innovation in my experience in subsea data. Now, my question is there something similar happening or going to happen regarding logistics data, standardization of data, because that is the event that gives small companies, innovative companies, the confidence to invest.
Okay, thank you. Who would you like to answer that, Tim?
All of them.
Or, anybody like to take that from the panel?
Anyone to start? I'm happy to start. So, it's all right. So a little bit of history lesson. You started there. Let me give you 2 data points as history, and then I'll answer your question. So if I take you back to the year 2000, there were about 60 operators here in the UK doing about 75,000 barrels on average each. We now have probably 60 operators doing about 30,000 barrels each. We have a far more fragmented market, and that makes it quite difficult. If you look at the oil and gas platforms and facilities we currently have in the North Sea, it's about the 80-20 rule. 20% of the platforms do all 80% of the production. Yeah? So we have a very different industry and different issues. We can't rely on the big boys to carry the load. So we have to find an industry solution. That's why OGTC was set up. I'm slightly biased because I'm on the board, but actually it was set up for that reason, to coordinate that. So there is a reason we need to do that. Back to answer your question, we don't have the luxury to wait somebody develops a bespoke standard. We better get our skates on bloody fast to actually deliver an outcome for this industry, because the longer we wait, the less value it has. So I actually think it is creating the standard now, find a set of early adopters and get on with it, is actually where we're coming from in terms of our thinking. And actually, don't need a whole industry, quite happy to start with a bunch of companies who actually think this is going to make a difference.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I come from a different sort of sector, so I'm looking at road freight and logistics on rail, and we have a different time horizon. We're looking at 2050, but I absolutely agree standardising on data and making data available across a common platform is the ingredients for a radical change. In the general logistics arena, we're talking about something called the physical internet, which requires standardised data available to all, and it treats physical packets, things you're moving around, in the same way we treat data packets. So they don't care which truck they go on, as long as they get to the destination and they can be reassembled into a consignment. So that work has started, and there's a direction of travel there. Now, interestingly, it's moving away from collaboration. Okay? The key is making the data available to all and let whatever system emerges from that data environment surface and organise itself into a new environment. Collaboration is scale limited. You'll only get so many companies in collaboration. Otherwise, it becomes too clumsy, difficult to manage. Whereas if you make data available to all and let the system reorganise, then that seems to me to be a better solution to get away from the scale limitation of collaboration.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Last point.
Yeah, hi. So for those of you who may or may not know, Petersons actually an energy logistics company. We are 100 years old in a couple of years' time. Yeah. And there's ASCO there, switching off my microphone. And I just wanted to give you a sense about actually what else is ongoing right now. So 20 years ago, operators in the southern North Sea started collaborating for marine logistics. So over the last 20 years and currently today, 9 operators in the southern North Sea are operating a pool and have been doing that through all the contracting principles, all the openness and sharing of data that takes a pool to drive to that point. They've done it for a long time. This isn't new. In the North Sea, out of Aberdeen, we've got a central and northern North Sea that's been up and running for 18 months with 4 operators. But Team Marine's been in Aberdeen for a long, long time doing this on that kind of vessel splitting way. So I understand what we're saying about standardisation to try and drive this to happen, but we haven't required standardisation for the efficiencies for vessel sharing to come to the fore before now. We've been able to do it, and we've got history to prove that. I think where the efficiencies come from is again, hello, is absolutely this platform-based approach. Because you've got so many actors in the supply chain that will then affect how logistics together, you should then look at how we can open the data platform to allow the connectivity in an agile manner so that at each point in time that I need to affect my part of the logistics supply chain, I can just send that data up into a consolidated view. That will take us forward. But for the likes of vessel sharing efficiencies, warehousing sharing, actually the standardisation, I believe, isn't necessary for today because we can look at history and see it's there already.
Great, thank you. And there are plans afoot, I think, as a follow-up from some of the work that's been done to look to get some of that data out there and visible onto online platforms to help drive some of this area forward. Next question. Gentleman back right. Quick intro to who you are and then your question and who you'd like to address it to.
I'm Kevin Boyd, and I found what we've been going through very encouraging because this is, for a long time, I think this has been needed. But I was just wondering if you're aware that we tried this back in 2005. I was part of a forum which was an industry, oil and gas industry track and trace forum, looking at digital technologies like RFID and all these kind of things. And I suppose my question is 2 things. One thing is, are we aware of this and are we taking advantage of all the work that we did there? Because we mapped out the process flows, we identified that there was a platform approach required and all the data that was required and some of the issues or barriers in terms of competitiveness between different partners. So are we taking advantage of that? First of all, the learnings that we had there. And second of all, how do we make sure that we don't get into the same trap. I mean, that fell apart 2007, 2008. So how do we stop that from happening?
Okay. Stephen, do you maybe want to pick up that to start with?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the first question, are we aware of it? I mean, yes, we are aware of certain things that have gone on historically. There's been a number. I think John talked about another initiative that sort of fell by the wayside, unfortunately. I think we were in that sort of fat mindset, if you like. We've had a number in the industry. We have got. So this is actually answering your second question. In the industry, we've been talking about digital oil field intelligent energy for 15, getting on for 20 years. But I think that was just a small core of people who saw the opportunity. And you'd go to an event and you essentially preach to converted. So they're all talking to each other about how great an idea it would be. And I think it really was a struggle to get, prove concepts and then get that buy-in at the highest level to just drive something through. What's changed, of course, is the downturn that's completely changed our view, and it gives us a little bit of a burning bridge. There is a bit of a challenge that we go back to the old way of thinking if the market changes. But there's always a danger of saying what's different this time. But I think what is different is that these technologies are not just affecting our industry. So it's not about just us. It's about every industry is being affected by the opportunities provided. And I think, as Paul said, there's plenty of opportunity for people to come in. So if the industry and our supply chain doesn't change, someone's going to do it for us. And so I think that's a key part. Should we be learning? Yes, we will learn. We look at learning. We have to know about it. So it'd be really great for you to tell us.
Yeah, and I think the work to date has been just understanding, and a lot of the focus yesterday was around where are the priorities. And as we move forwards with a shortlisted view of priorities, that would be the time probably to go out and to get some experiences from across the industry about what's been done previously as well. So. Yeah,
and I think that final point, we will work with the various MER UK boards, the Oil and Gas UK forums, like the Efficiency Task Force, etc., just so we're not going off on a tangent and we also don't miss out learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's one important point in this, and that is what you can learn from other industries and other sectors. And the one thing we know, having done a lot of work in this area about disruptive technologies and disruption, is it will not come from within the sector. You will not radically change your own business models. And that's because you're in something called the competency trap. That means you know how to do things, you think nobody else can do it better, and therefore you just carry on in your own little world. In actual fact, the innovation will come from outside. And that's how the book industry was disrupted by Amazon. It's how the music industry was disrupted by Apple and iTunes. And there's many other examples. So I would say I would encourage you to open up to the outside, invite competition, and then just position yourself to ride it out.
Great. I'm actually going to ask Jack to come in at this point, and then I'll come to your question next, because it has been a disruptive.
I couldn't agree more with the fact that it's going to come outside of the industry. I think that if you look at a lot of the companies that were mentioned in the video earlier, Airbnb, Amazon, you can put blockchain into the mix here. Arguably, they're just mediums by which information is conveyed between agents, right? They're not actually industry guys. So we all talk about sharing of information, standardization, but what are the incentives at play by which this change can happen? It's probably that you have a common platform, has been mentioned quite a few times here, that everyone has an incentive to participate. No one has a monopoly on that platform, so it's a kind of free agent platform where everyone can join, but no one can kind of control it. And if you establish that, it's a medium by which collaboration can take place, where people have an incentive to standardize product tags, for example, because Shell isn't going to have their own pumps 565, which no one else knows what it is, because that's going to be incongruent with a communal platform. So.
Okay, thank you, Jack. I'll come to you second. Just gentleman here.
Enterprises. I've been heavily involved in the early stage startup companies from an investment and mentoring support perspective. Going back to the first question, looking for a transitional moment. Sarah highlighted one excellent example of H&M in the textile industry. That didn't happen by accident. It happened by need. And that need was to display and demonstrate traceability, that products were ethically sourced, ethically produced, ethically distributed, and ethically disposed of, until such times as the oil and gas industry picks up on its ethics. I think it's very unlikely we're going to see significant change, because it's only, and the example right now, which is going to shake up many industries, is GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is really going to radicalize the way and the balance of power and how personal data is managed. And it's only through forcing companies to demonstrate that they have and remain compliant with that legislation that we're going to see a transformational change.
Did you have a question specifically, or just a comment? If it's a comment, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question that follows on from that then is, how near or far is the industry going towards traceability in everything it does, it uses, how it... Because I believe that the government industry body, which holds the vast amount of data, is in a total disarray. So that's got to be a starting point.
I'll kind of take that as a start and hand over. I think one of the big drivers for that is actually going to be through the customs regulations that really finally decide what they're going to do pre-post-Brexit. We don't know. We're certainly seeing that track and trace at an asset level. So it doesn't matter what containers you're putting back on the back of a vessel. I'm sorry if I'm taking it back to this example, but it doesn't matter about the container on the back of a vessel. It matters what's in it. And you need to be able to trace that through its life cycle and pin all of the customs data to it. That's actually going to drive a different set of behaviours through the industry that will force people to capture data in a different way because it's legislative and it will make that change. So I think off the back of whatever comes out of the customs decisions, that will be a bit of a lever for this change. Track and trace is probably the biggest buzzword in marine logistics right now, and for good reason, because if we don't know where our equipment is, and that's not just offshore in transit and in the warehouses, how can we go about reducing the footprint of our inventory and thus getting the efficiencies off the back of that? And that doesn't just rely on RFID to tell you. You can do a lot of very, very good and clever things just by joining up these data triggers. That is ongoing just now in the industry as we speak.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think... So from just tying us back to yesterday, so we had Jan Godspell from University of Warwick here yesterday, and she mentioned this as one of the drivers. Obviously, if you look in the retail market and the H&M observation, that's true. And I think in our industry, we're very guilty of thinking, well, we have no retail customers, so it doesn't really matter how we treat our supply chain. So there's two aspects to this. There is the operational drive to understand where everything is, which is one thing, but it's that visibility, that transparency of how your supply chain comes to you, and at the bottom end, are we treating people ethically? That will become more and more important, and more people will make decisions that I think will even affect our industry. So we need to be cognizant of that, I think. At the same time, that drive will have an operational impact, as Sarah's outlined as well. So I think it's a very interesting point that probably was one of the surprises that came out from the discussion. And just going back to what Sarah's example of the Southern North Sea, and then, Christian's view on the NHS and how DHL were seen as being, taking advantage of their situation. So our industry, I've had some discussions talking about that one of those similar scenarios where they feel that the supplier is taking advantage of the situation. So traceability and visibility is really key to supporting getting these new business models working, I think. So,
okay.
Maybe Phil can
I'm going to keep moving us along just in the interest of time. I just want to build on one of the comments. We didn't really touch upon it there. I'll come to you in a second, just on GDPR as well. We were talking at dinner last night about the personal data that's held on Vantage, for example, as the industry solution in Aberdeen, and the need for that to be refreshed and revisited. And that could be one of the triggers for change as well as this moves forward. We talked a bit about the materials supply chain here, but also the people side. That would be an obvious area that will be disrupted by GDPR as we move forwards as well. So Thank you for the question. Next one.
Murat Keçe, Technology Coordinator from Nexen UK. All the examples we're talking about are commoditized industries with huge volumes. And we're also talking about technology here. Technology is really not the blocker here. All we're saying from all the discussions today, other prerequisites like the standardization, behaviors, commercial issues, collaboration blockers, that's what's preventing us from improving the supply chain, in my view. I don't think that challenge is technological, it is more commercial, behavioral, and other stuff. And to me, aren't those things prerequisite before we start putting more investment into technology for supply chain? That's my question. And secondly, shouldn't we be focusing on to the technologies that will really make a difference to increase the volume so that we can improve? Because OPEX is 10% of the total cost. We're trying to chip off 1% of that 10%. To me, the challenge is, can we get technologies to help us to add that impact or bring more value to justify that 90% rather than just chipping off 1% from the 10%.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Christian first, just in terms of the first aspect of whether we go with technology first or whether there's other enablers that need to be laid first.
I think you mentioned quite a few good points there. There's a lot of things that can be done right away, which doesn't require necessarily technology. What I'm saying is that technology nowadays might make business cases more appealing, meaning that the upcoming technology in terms of blockchain and so on, and its advantages towards traceability and trust among different collaborators, or RPA and so on, is enhancing all the other steps you mentioned in terms of collaboration. So the business case might be there to actually go ahead with some of these initiatives, because technology makes it easy to adapt, to do it, and to execute against it. So I think it's two elements. It's technology makes all these deep steps more appealing, plus you get additional benefits later on out of it, because I know the example of RPA and what it done to procurement. It's hugely transformative. What you get out in terms of efficiency, automation, and cost reduction. And to the point that 1% out of 10%, it's still savings. So why do we need to wait for the big buckets if we can start with baby steps, have a proof of concept and pilots, and then roll out certain technology to other elements of the supply chain?
Thanks. Christian, can I come to Paul in terms of the 1% versus 10%? Just while we do, we had some good conversation. Yes.
Great question. So maybe slightly different insight, right? So go back in the industry. Over the last 3 years, we reduced our cost from about just under $30 a barrel to $15 a barrel. Huge effort. How did we get there? A lot of beating the supply chain, a lot of letters, please reduce your cost, and a lot of kind of wrapped up on a nice collaboration label, and I think, made a massive amount of progress in. And I need to recognize that. We also need to recognize is that the community who did that is about, I'll come back to it, it's about 800 people in the supply chain, in the operator community. It's a very small community, right? A lot of it in the supply chain, but actually the operator community is very small. So we need to ask these people, and maybe it's not the same people, we need to ask people to now make the next change. And that requires a different mindset, a different grouping, a different type of people to make it happen. Because you can't ask the people who are very steeped and be promoted to do a supply chain process to suddenly change everything around. So I do think there's a big prize out there, but it might not necessarily be exactly the same group. Probably some, but not all the same group. So we need to figure out what's the change mechanism, the change energy we can create to the next lot. And that is going to be there. Now, I think the savings is far more than 1% or 10%. We're talking far bigger numbers to make this work. But it will be a very different way of doing it, a very different group of people, and a very different way of organizing. And I don't think as an industry, we haven't even got ready for that yet. And this is the catalyst to make it happen.
Great, thank you. Question at the back corner. And there was some good conversation yesterday about process versus technology first, which I think talks to your first point. So thank you, gentleman over there.
Duncan Hart from a company called Deep Miner, previous my DHL with all their problems with KFC at the moment, but we'll move on from their platform that they've rolled out. As an industry, we're talking about traceability and the key elements around supply chain logistics and complication. Are we looking at the agricultural industry? The agricultural industry is a classic one. Lots of diverse suppliers, lots of diverse product, lots of competition. Traceability from field to fork is critical, and transparency with abattoirs, and all of that. It seems to me like quite a natural fit to what the oil and gas industry is, and it's quite remote.
It's a really good and relevant point, actually. At the moment, we are speaking to a producer down in Fife, Kettle, who are absolutely looking to optimise in their supply chain as well. A great challenge in agriculture is state change. You know, a carrot pulled from the ground, it then is cut up, and then if it's not accepted as a whole carrot, comes back in and it changes another state. And so that management of state change is really, really interesting, the same as kind of textiles. So, yeah, there's a lot of synergies. I think we often do get hooked on looking at these different industries and saying it's like automotive, aviation, textile, agri. In fact, if you just take all of that away, it's all the same. We've got the same problems. I absolutely agree on the point, about looking at the other industries that are further ahead than us and then try and translate some of those learnings in. But we're a very different output as well. We've got to also recognise that whilst we think that we are consistent in pulling oil out of the ground, we're absolutely not from one operator to the next. So if you're automotive aviation, you're making a car or an A380, you know what your end goal is and you can organise a supply chain behind that. Oil and gas is slightly different. Until we get that standardisation at the operator level, how are we ever going to truly be able to get the same levels of standardisation in the rapid time? And that's where digital comes in, because if you then pin your supply chain together digitally, you'll be able to react in that same way. So agri, yes, I think people are talking about it just now, but there's a lot ongoing that's relevant from lots of different sectors, in my opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. Phil?
Can I butt in there? Sorry, just to say, I'm actually working for the agri-tech people who run the animal tracking system. So when you see a cow with nice dangly yellow earrings, they are extremely advanced in what they're doing and very, very active in trying to move forwards, because they essentially want bragging rights for Scottish agricultural products as being the best in the marketplace. So if anybody's interested, I can introduce anyone to the key people who are running all those programs.
Great.
Sorry to butt in.
No problem, Phil.
That's okay. We do a lot of work with the cold chain, which is sort of from the field all the way to the consumer. And a lot of the innovation in that space is around technology. It's about delivering distributed intelligence to the supply chain so that the things can design their own supply chain dynamically. And this all sounds, all very blue sky, but this is happening in some of the poorest countries in the world. And it's happening because it's going to drive new value to those farmers in Africa, India, and elsewhere. So innovation can still happen without the richness of the industry. It's technology-led, and it's being driven by the need to create new value streams and not stick to the old value streams. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Phil. According to KFC, the chicken crossed the road but didn't get to the store. That was a quote on Twitter yesterday, so there we go. Any last couple of questions from around the room? That wasn't a terrible joke. That was actually their Twitter quote, if you go online and have a look yesterday.
Hi there, I'm Amy Watson. I think everyone that spoke this morning mentioned blockchain. Would anyone like to elaborate on what you're expecting to come from that, being that my company has a blockchain solution? I'm interested.
Excellent. I think that's one for Jack, probably. I'll let Jack go first.
Probably not what people expect. I think people expect in the blockchain sphere for you to have a kind of complete supply chain that is mapped out and, everyone is pinging a node in the middle and that's getting logged, and that's to the benefit of everyone. I think that's pretty utopian, and I don't think that's going to happen, definitely not in the short term. What I do think is going to happen is things similar to blockchain, perhaps using some blockchain technology in a limited sense. I guess one example I could call on in terms of which I think it will come into play, in fact I'm hoping it will come into play, is around counterparty compliance. It's an area of suppliers which they get vetted. It's kind of non-confidential information, and that is just done bilaterally between buyers and suppliers, and there's a huge duplication of efforts between buyers and suppliers. Now, there's no reason why that information can't be shared with a community of buyers to reduce that duplication. Now, is that blockchain? Is that sticking that information on a ledger that is visible to everyone? Can you make it more robust in terms of like a information architecture-wise? Probably. Is it Bitcoin? No, but it is using some of the elements of the blockchain thinking to create an architecture where you're sharing information for the benefit of the community.
Thanks, Jack. Phil, did you have a comment as well?
It's just a very quick one. I think the same sort of technology approach can be used to record transactions at product level. So each product can accrue its own costs as it's handled by different elements of the supply chain. And if you go back to, I've got to move away from talking about supply chain, to be honest. It's supply networks or supply ecosystems. Supply chain is something that we invented 20 years ago and kind of gone past. But yeah, if a thing can record its own transactions, by the time it gets to the next player in the network, then that player can pay according to the transactions that's been taking place.
Great. We've rebranded to supply networks.
Excellent.
Let's keep moving on through, if that's all right. Question back there.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Nishant, and I'm founder of OMI, and we are working with one of the alcohol companies, and we are doing this provenance tracking back to the farms from which the botanicals come. But the problem that we face is that after we have done the POC or any pilot for provenance of quality, there are so many points in the value chain that do not have an incentive to put the sensors in, put the data in, and be part of the chain. At the top of the chain, regulation can come in and enforce them to ask the immediate supplier to comply with them, but it's nearly impossible to go deeper into the chain. Can you speak about the incentives that can be created for everyone on the chain to be on board?
Anybody want to pick up that? Incentives for everybody involved?
You're totally right in terms of right now in the supply chain, you only have visibility of your immediate counterparty. So it's very, very tough to see who your supplier is being supplied by. And often that's something that people use because your immediate suppliers are legit, right? Their suppliers may not be, but you're buying off a legit supplier, so that's great for you. It's not great for an ecosystem. You can embed incentive mechanisms. It's all about the medium by which people connect, right? So if you create a medium which is transaction-orientated, that the smaller suppliers will be transacting on the same platform as the bigger suppliers, then you can quite easily, it's not rocket science. You attach like a tag based on a project, and that will map the supply chain down. It requires that everyone transacts on the same medium, which is difficult, but it all boils down to this, no one having monopoly over a particular supply chain, it being a medium which is open to all, that people can transact on, and it's not driven by one or two or three people. Organisations.
Great, thanks, Jack.
Can I just say one quick word?
Yeah.
So I think the key to this is compliance will be your access to resources. So everybody becomes compliant because they're accessing resources, whether those are customers or suppliers. And if you don't have compliance, then you don't access those resources.
Great. Any more questions from around the room?